Hello, and welcome to American Amnesia. I'm your host, Cliff Garner, and this will be coming on Clisario 2 on YouTube, and hopefully I'll figure out Minds enough to start linking up on there. Also, Clisario 2 on Gab. I haven't really gotten Gab or Minds going yet, but I do intend to do that as soon as I figure them out. And also on YouTube, not YouTube, but Facebook, on the Cliff Garner, and under American Amnesia. Hopefully, I'll be adding other platforms in the near future, but I want to get those all working at first. I've been talking about Turkey. I have a certain amount of expertise from having lived there. And a lot of insights into how things are going there and what's going on. Even though I'm not there now, I miss it. I really do admit missing it. I enjoyed living there. I love the people. The food's good. You get tired of it after a while, but it is actually quite good. I miss lamb burgers as opposed to hamburgers. When I would go to the market, I would buy ground lamb, and it was quite delicious. And there were other little things, just little differences between there and here. Some of them very pleasant, some of them not, some of them upsetting. Treatment of women is a big one. Although there was actually westernizing when I was still there, but they started regressing long before I left. That was a countercurrent with the Erdogan rule of the country, and that said, there were things that he was doing that were positive. I am very hard put to find any now, outside of maybe what he did with healthcare, which I think actually was brilliant. But as far as a model of, I imagine you would call it a single-payer system, although well, everybody doesn't pay their taxes there. I mean, their tax system is inefficient, whereas ours over here is probably overly efficient. And over there, a lot of people don't pay taxes, and so paying taxes puts you in the system. I think that was a good thing. And people, actually, a lot of people maintained their own private health care insurance. A lot of people forget that healthcare and insurance really are two separate things. So we made it an insurance issue in America, whereas other places actually saw it as being a healthcare issue, with insurance being maybe perhaps incidental. And again, what Erdogan did with the healthcare there was brilliant, and it was very good. I have no complaints about the health care I received in Turkey from the doctors, the quality of the doctors. They're a little bit behind us technologically, and that is a fact, but not that far. And the doctors are quite excellent, actually. There are a lot of people that go there for a lot of surgeries and different physical issues that... well, the healthcare tourism trade, right, is really big on the place. Another place that's really big on that list is Cuba, and it's because, again, cheap. One of the things Castro did, and really we should have done here, and there hasn't been a lack of doctors in Turkey or in China. They made a lot of them. That creates competition, keeps the price down. Think about it, folks. Market forces. Imagine that. Countries that are known for their communism, even like China and Cuba, using market forces to keep the price down. Now, Cuba has gone above and beyond the call of duty. In fact, I think we're on the other side of the rainbow on that. However, in China, it's really kind of interesting. The big pharma is kind of reined in by herbal cures over there. And another thing that I got to see firsthand. Sometimes it was great. Sometimes it was kind of frustrating because they would rather have you chew on licorice root than to take medicine for your flu or cold. And they would rather have you chew on an orchid than to take aspirin. So you do have that aspect of it, but once you find out where the aspirin is and spend a little bit of money on it, actually it was quite cheap, maintaining your health there and doing a good job of it. Actually, I had to get shots because I had the flu and I couldn't breathe. It was hard enough to breathe anyway. Which is a real big downside of China. But they had what you needed. When it really came down to it, it was fine. America needs to take a look around the rest of the world and see what they're doing. It could be very helpful here. One thing for sure, I'm very, very greatly in favor of Trump going after Big Pharma. Big Pharma has been making a ton of money unnecessarily, and that because they bought off our politicians. I'm very skeptical about lobbyists in general. Lobbyism is corruption. It is bribery. It's just making it legal, putting a formal imprimatur on it and say this is okay, but that's not. It's not okay. It's not okay. They shouldn't be getting in office to get rich. That's a fact. So to return to Turkey, what's going on over there, right? People really don't get it. It's like, well, they're in NATO and they're not cooperative with us. What happened? Well, there were a lot of things that happened. One of the biggest was the election of Erdogan and the elevation of the AKP, into the rulership of the country. Erdogan in particular, because he himself is a religious bigot, although the party is a Islamist party. It very pure and simply is. The party is the Turkish branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. The pure and simple. It's the Turkish branch. That's how the Brotherhood formed and evolved in Turkey. And to look at it otherwise is to deny the root fact. It's a key point of what's going on over there. That was why, in spite of the personal clashes that with Morsi, who was the Brotherhood ruler of Egypt for a short time, that in spite of those stresses and clashes with him, ultimately Erdogan's loyalties lay with him. And they still do. And when the army of Egypt overthrew Morsi, Erdogan was more than just upset. He was just catatonic. He was utterly beside himself. And he was afraid of the military in Turkey doing the same thing. And one of the things he did was systematically liquidate the general staff and the officer corps and the military itself of elements that he didn't like. He did the same thing inside the MIT, which is their combination of FBI and CIA, and he did the same thing with the police departments. Now, when there was a divide that went on inside the AKP, it's still going on, which was basically a clash between Erdogan, Tayyip, the ruler there, and a fellow named Fethullah Gulen. And Gulen, Gulen, just so you know, Gulen, well, the U has two dots, so it's an E sound. And Gulen was a religious leader, and he headed a group that was called Hizmet, which is translated as service. And this group was one of the building blocks with which the AKP was created. The falling out between the two of them came from their very different agendas, and it came partly because Gulen was a cleric, and his main idea was to engage the world in dialogue, religious dialogue, and hopefully he would bring Islam on top. That was his plan, and he has not succeeded. Now, he has come to the U.S., and one of the things he has done here is he's kind of cornered some markets in the charter school systems, and this has been a very pernicious influence in the U.S. I won't call it otherwise, because that's exactly what it is. And he has illegally brought a lot of Turkish teachers in to teach all kinds of different things, and it's cut down his costs, but it was illegal as hell. The independent contractors and stuff, right? You know, he was basically screwing the teachers. He was screwing the students on the quality of the teachers they got. He was screwing the public by using up public funds to promote a religious agenda. So you've got all sorts of really ugly things going on with this, and they've turned their backs to investigating him here in Illinois, because he's been huge here, and several other states as well. And he is a fixture in Pennsylvania, just so you know. And Erdogan wants him back. There is another character that's over here in the U.S. that Erdogan wants back, and his name is Zarab, but he wants him back for quite a different reason. He would like to have him back because, well, I didn't really go into Gulen, but I'll come back to him. But he wants Zarab back because Zarab was Erdogan's boy in his dirty dealings with Iran up until the change of administrations here in the U.S. Erdogan was using Zarab, who was Turkish, but he's actually Iranian by ethnicity, but he was also a Turkish citizen. I think he married a Turkish woman. I won't swear to that. And he probably lived long enough. I think it's 5 years that you can gain citizenship. I considered becoming a dual citizen for a while, and decided better of it because I didn't like the idea of Erdogan having any claim on me. That was really the kicker, but I mean there were other reasons I decided not to do that. One of them really being my loyalty to my homeland. But I did consider the possibility because it would be good to have more than one passport and be able to move about freely, and not only that, have some input on what was going on in Turkey politically. However, after I ended up single again and broke up with the girl I was dating that was Turkish, my idea on that soured, and really the romance of it paled, and the reality of it was that I'm an American, and I will never really be anything but. And that's good. I'm proud of being American. I learned to not control my tongue because I am American. I did for a whole year in China, and it was not easy. I did a good job of it, though. I watched myself. But living in Turkey, where people are very opinionated, I felt a lot more at home there than I did in China, where I had to watch everything I said and did, and I was constantly under surveillance. And I'm sure I was watched in Turkey as well, but the Turks are really a lot of ways like Americans. I mean, they have the same independent streak, the same, hey, you don't like it, you can stuff it kind of attitude. And they like opinions. They like people having opinions. They respect that in other people. If you believe in something, you stand up for it. And even though they didn't agree with me, in fact, quite often they did listen to me, and they did respect what I had to say. And I always loved that, and I love them for it. And I still do. There's always hope, and perhaps when Erdogan reaches too far and collapses, then there will be something, and I'm sure there will be something very valuable to save there. And I know that the Turks will rise to the occasion. They're good people. Anyway, back to Gillen. What Gillen did to fall out with Erdogan is that he started reporting through the press that he had access to, and through the police departments and certain lawyers and stuff and judges. They were doing investigations on corruption, and Erdogan's name was coming up all over the place. And the culmination was probably a recording of Erdogan talking to his son, Bilal. And Bilal called his father up and said, "Daddy, what do I do with all the money in the shoe boxes?" And he started telling him, put it in real estate, buy resorts and hotels and this and that and the other. And it's a remarkable document. And he says it's not true. Well, BS. It is. It is him. It is the son. The corruption in Turkey is perhaps unmatched by anything outside of perhaps the Clintons and maybe Obama. And Obama was working with Erdogan. He also didn't trust him. This is a kind of a key thing. One of the things that happened is that with the Arab Spring, Erdogan overnight switched his whole foreign policy from being a good neighbor to, say, Assad and Muammar Gaddafi and Mubarak, to being very hostile, moving troops in and out. What he was doing is he was taking guys from al-Qaeda in Iraq, which became ISIS. And he was moving them from Afghanistan and Iran to Libya and back and down into Syria. That's what he was doing. He was supplying them with money that was given to him by the Saudi Arabians and the United Arab Emirates. He was getting money from several of the oil sheikdoms, and he was dispersing those funds to particularly ISIS, which at the time was still basically al-Qaeda in Iraq, which was Zarqawi's movement, and that survived Zarqawi's death in that conflict there in the Civil War. And then he was backing al-Nusra front, in particular in Syria. That's where your white helmets come from. Al-Nusra is the al-Qaeda group inside of Syria. Now, there's other names that are going on in Libya. Their alignments are pretty similar to those. There's some overlap, there's some divergences, and there's some other things going on. But basically, those two groups are the ones that represent the fanatical Islamic movements. And Erdogan funneled the money to them. He didn't choose any secular groups. He chose religious fanatics. And that's probably because they most resembled him attitudinally. Now, as far as it goes, Erdogan has had people around him who've been telling him he's the Mahdi. And that's the Imam Mahdi is a apocalyptic character. It's not in the Quran, it's in the Hadith. That this person is supposed to come back at the end of days and help Jesus to set things right. Basically, the apocalypse will come down through war, in focusing in Israel, which, according to their apocalypse, the Israelis will be slaughtered, or the Jews will be slaughtered to the man, and Islam will be established around the world. Jesus will come back. He will kill the pigs, get rid of all the pork. He will break all the crosses and force all Christians to become Muslims. There you go. And Erdogan believes that he's this character that will do that. That's why he does saber rattle with Israel. Ultimately, I dare say he will attack Israel. And if you want to look for a biblical narrative to look at, examine the Gog and Magog war. Those tribes that are mentioned with Gog and Magog, Gog of Magog. Magog is a place, Gog is a person. Gog is Gyges, who was a Lydian leader back at the time of Cyrus the Mede and of Xerxes, the great conqueror of Persia. And that this person has an apocalyptic overtone, and the kingdom of Lydia is actually Western Turkey. That is where it is. And the other tribes that are mentioned, like Torgarma and stuff, these are all regions in what is called Asia Minor in ancient times, but it is modern Anatolian Turkey today. And that's a fact. Gog and Magog were held back, according to Greek folklore, by Alexander the Great. They were walled back up when he sent his expedition into Bactria, which is actually in Afghanistan. This is where the Greco Buddhist nation thrived, and that's where the Greek Buddhas that the Taliban destroyed. Why they were there, but they were holding back Gog and Magog. That is the Turkic people. Oh. This is then, and it has entered folklore through this, and through folklore it has entered into the Quran, directly into the Quran, and also directly into the Hadith that back up the Quran. You have Dhul-Qarnayn, who is actually a thinly disguised Alexander the Great, and he built the wall that holds them back. They haven't held them back in centuries. And there's still other Turkic people on the other side of that border, I suppose you want to call it, and that in the last days they may just come pouring across. There you go. So this apocalyptic vision has some connections to Christian apocalypse, and but it also has a lot to do with modern politics because Erdogan believes this, and he believes he is this person. So you have to keep that in mind when you look at Erdogan. He's every bit as nutty as Ahmadinejad was in Iran. So that was an important personal issue. But these things all tie together, and as I say, it brings an apocalyptic angle to our news today. One that if people want to scoff at it, go ahead, but it still is an effect. And Erdogan does believe this about himself. Yeah, it doesn't matter what you think about it. Now, there was an election this year. I wish I took the time to deal with it, but I was actually rather sick at the time. It was in May, and I was still in the hospital, I believe, while it went on. And this is an article from Burak Bekdil from May 9th of this year, 2018. And this is in a magazine called Gatestone Institute. It's an international policy council. Burak Bekdil was one of my favorite reporters in Turkey while I was living there. He was fired by Hurriyet Daily News because he wouldn't shut up. And Hurriyet was under extreme pressure from Erdogan because they were highly critical, and they're still critical, but not quite as vocal as they were. Abdullah Gül, who's actually representing a non-Erdogan divide within the AKP, is one of their contributors from time to time. And he's probably, out of all the major AKP leaders, probably one of the closest to Fethullah Gülen without getting in trouble for it. What Erdogan is doing is because Gülen was exposing his misdeeds, is that he is trying to get us here in the U.S. to extradite Mr. Gülen so that he can put him on trial, supposedly for a role in the rebellion, if you want to call it that, over there in Turkey just a couple years ago. Now, this article is called Turkey's Elections, but Who Counts the Votes? And it's got a few bullets here. First, under the new electoral laws, authorities would be able to appoint government officials to run ballot stations, relocate election stations on security grounds, let law enforcement officials monitor voting, and permit the counting of unstamped ballot papers. Okay, Erdogan has actually instituted cheating as being formally illegal for as long as it works for him. Next bullet: the risk of holding elections under the shadow of guns could put voters under pressure. There's a quote from Burak Tutan, an opposition lawmaker, told a parliamentary committee, referring to the prospect of armed security forces in voting stations. Third bullet: shortly after the 2017 referendum, which was previous year, an Austrian member of the Council of Europe said that up to 2.5 million Turkish votes could have been manipulated. Non-resident Turks voting in the election, some of them actually citizens of other countries, and dual citizens. In fact, I don't think he lets any Turks go. Since then, Erdogan has further consolidated power by legislation, see new electoral laws, and law enforcement, see police brutality. I'm getting words on all kinds of ugliness going on over there. And increasing the risk of election fraud on June 24th. And let me continue. On April 16, 2017, Turks voted to give away their democracy when 51.4% of them endorsed constitutional amendments that made President Recep Tayyip Erdogan head of state and head of the ruling party all at the same time. It was not permitted before. The president was always forced to give up his role as the party leader. And that's because he was supposed to be above party and represent all the people. That's why Abdullah Gül did that. And while there was always a division of powers between the president and the prime minister, Erdogan has combined the two offices, into which the prime minister is now just a shell, is an assistant. And all power resides with his office. That's what he has done. There are no checks and balances left. He got rid of them all. Before the referendum, Erdogan's powerful state apparatus systematically silenced the No campaign and its supporters, while the Yes campaign enjoyed all possible government support, instrumentalized by the means of public resources. The Yes and No was on a vote whether or not to endow the presidency with all those powers that were formerly divided between him and the prime minister. And he appointed a puppet prime minister after he got rid of the previous puppet who wasn't compliant enough. And now he's got Yildirim, who is truly his bend-over boy. Sad day. The Turks went into the ballot box under the state of emergency declared after a failed coup in July of 2016. The co-leaders of a pro-Kurdish party who campaigned for no had been imprisoned since November 2016 on charges of links with terror groups. Some of them are still in prison. In the 15 months leading up to the referendum, police had used violence to stop 264 peaceful demonstrations in favor of the No campaign. Imagine that. He was shooting my neighbors because they were Alevis and they were protesting their ill treatment by the government. The witch hunt included 47,155 people in jail, including 150 journalists, 113,260 under detention, and 135,000 people purged from government service. Jailed officials included 10,732 police officers, 168 military generals, 7,463 military officers, 2,575 judges and prosecutors, and 208 governors and other public administrators. Observers from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, confirmed cases of intimidation against the No campaign across the country. There were signs of an unfair election race on the day of the referendum. Only an hour into the vote count, the Supreme Board of Elections declared as valid of voting papers without official seals, a practice clearly in violation of the election laws. The opposition bloc claimed that in some cities the election observers from the No groups were removed from their polling stations. Slightly more than a year after they voted to give Erdogan unprecedented executive powers, the Turks will vote again on June 24th this year. That would be the next one that came about. In early polls orchestrated by Erdogan and his nationalist foe turned ally, Nationalist Movement Party, MHP. The vote will be for both presidential and parliamentary elections. If any candidate fails to win more than 50% of the presidential vote, the second round will be held on July 8th based on a simple majority. No doubt this will be an existential election war for Erdogan. He has done everything in his capacity to consolidate power and maximize chances for victory. In January, he launched a military incursion into northwest Syria and captured the Kurdish enclave of Afrin, still under Turkish military control. An operation largely aimed at winning nationalist, militaristic Turkish sympathies. 90% of Turks said they supported Operation Olive Branch, indicating the potential ballot box gains for Erdogan in June elections. In April, Erdogan's government announced incentives for 135 billion lira, approximately $32 billion. It tells you how much the lira is not worth anything, and that is because of what he did. It used to be worth about 40 cents when I left. Now it's worth almost nothing. That was low too, but this is pathetic. The worth of investment projects creating 134,000 new jobs. Also in April, Prime Minister Binali Yildirim announced 24 billion lira, approximately $5.7 billion, worth of tax breaks and social transfers. What appears to be a government orchestration, Turkey's biggest media group, Doğan Media Company, the last bastion of free journalism in the country, was sold to an Erdogan crony in a $890 million deal. In a leaked telephone conversation in 2014, DMC's new owner, Erdogan Demirören, was heard apologizing to Erdogan for an article in Milliyet newspaper, which he had bought earlier from Doğan. "Did I upset you, boss?" Demirören asked Erdogan, weeping and promising the then Prime Minister that he would find the source of the article in question. With DMC's transfer to Demirören, pro-Erdogan media estimated to account for 90% of all media outlets in Turkey. This is even worse than in America. At least some outlets are pro-Trump. Hang on a minute. Yeah, another thing I had to take. This is taking a while to get through. I've got a couple other things with Bekdil lined up to do pretty shortly. I plan to next couple days sit down and do these. At any rate, I'm reading an article by Burak Bekdil, Turkey's election, but who counts the votes? This was done just before the election in earlier this year in June. I was out of the hospital by this point, by the time they did the election, but I was still in it while he wrote this article, I do believe. And I had other concerns while this was all going on. Again, Erdogan had taken control of 90% of all the media outlets in Turkey by this year, actually before he did this election, and even Period Daily News, which is still slightly opposition, it has been co-opted into the fold by Demirören, one of Erdogan's pals, buying out the interest of it. And I'll resume the article. All that electioneering may not guarantee a double elections victory for Erdogan. 4 opposition parties have pledged to unite behind a common candidate against Erdogan in the second round of the race. They will also ally in parliamentary elections against Erdogan's conservative nationalist bloc with MHP. And the two parties, the MHP and AKP, have gone into an alliance, and this has been in effect for a while now. And the MHP is they consider themselves the right-wing nationalistic version of what do you call it? Kemalism. That's kind of a misnomer, really. They tend to have a socialistic program. They are nationalistic. So really what you're looking at is actually kind of a quasi-fascist group. And they supplied one of their groups that has backed them all along. It's called the Grey Wolves. This was a right-wing terrorist group, supposedly, during the Turkish Civil War. They were in opposition to the communists, and the communists and them would fight. This is kind of like with the Nazis. What you're dealing with are essentially nationalistic socialists and red socialists, international socialists, and they don't agree. And that's really where it comes from. They're like I keep saying, this line as a spectrum doesn't work as far as determining political loyalties and where they lie in juxtaposition to others. It's a completely different model, and really the actual model, I don't know what you would call it, but there's a certain continuity between fascism and the various communist type organizations and socialist organizations as well, and their philosophies. They're all collectivist philosophically, and they do have a revolutionary quasi-Marxist bent, no matter who they are. And the MHP is definitely the nationalist wing. The CHP, the CHP, is the Social Democrats, and and the two of them are very similar in a lot of respects. But when you get down to the viewpoint of the world, it's quite different. The JHP tend to be like a lot of your social democratic parties of Europe. They have a capitalist means of production, but they do have a leaning towards the creation of social programs that follow a socialist model, but they are not in and of themselves necessarily socialist. They're more of really the welfare state, and the JHP is really there. They're very similar to any other social democratic group, and they're very similar to what the Democrats were in the 1990s. Not so much today. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the Democrats gone to pot. But at any rate, the combination has been an interesting one, and you have Erdogan's fanatics, the shroud heads, to the death, running around with their kebab knives, and you got the gray wolves lurking in their little corners with their shotguns. I mean, this is a very intimidating climate, actually, and it doesn't look good, if you ask me. Enter the dark side of the moon. In March, Turkey's parliament, controlled by Erdogan's Justice and Development Party and its ally, the MHP, passed sweeping changes to electoral laws designed to help Erdogan tighten his grip on power. The overhaul allows parties to ally with others, which means smaller parties could bypass the 10% national threshold and win parliamentary representation. You know, it's about time that happened, but he's doing it because now it benefits him as opposed to the other side. And when there was the possibility of the MHP, the JHP, and the I forget the acronym for the Kurdish party. I think it's BPP, I guess would be. That when that was a possibility, the Erdogan was dangling to both the Kurdish and to the nationalists the idea of working with him. He had been working with the Kurds. He stabbed them in the back. He did it maybe a little bit too early, and it really cost him. He almost lost that election, and he had the three opposition parties looking at each other, and the MHP decided they would not work with the Kurds, period. And so the opportunity to have an opposition government formed by the three opposition parties was lost. And Erdogan stayed in power just by the skin of his teeth. But when he co-opted the MHP, this has been a relationship that has stayed in place for years. It's been in place for, I think, 4 years now. And unfortunately, he's not going anywhere. The opposition's counter move to form a four-party alliance could, in theory, balance the government-opposition breakdown, but they had to bring together groups that otherwise did not get along. The opposition also warns of election fraud, reminiscent of the allegations in the 2017 referendum, which was widespread. Although on this one, I understand there wasn't too much accusation, but there was probably not as much ability to monitor. We'll talk about that the next time. Under the new electoral laws, authorities would be able to appoint government officials to run ballot stations, relocate election stations on security grounds, let law enforcement officials monitor voting, and permit the counting of unstamped ballot papers. The risk of holding elections under the shadow of guns could put voters under pressure. Secret ballot, too. I understand that that's kind of gone the way of the dodo. Burak Bekdil, an opposition lawmaker, told the parliamentary committee, referring to the prospect of armed security forces in voting stations. The president knows that a small shift in votes could mean a defeat in a contest he cannot lose. Wolfgang Piccoli, the co-founder of Teneo Intelligence in London, told Bloomberg. Further initiatives to maximize the chances of a positive outcome on ballot day are likely. Namely, the strangulation of any opposition on TV or radio or any other means within Turkey. And in fact, there's heavy censorship of certain things on the internet that Erdogan was able to silence any opposition. Shortly after the 2017 referendum, an Austrian member of the Council of Europe said that up to 2.5 million Turkish votes could have been manipulated. Since then, Erdogan has further consolidated power by legislation, see new electoral laws, and law enforcement, see police brutality, which has worsened, increasing the risk of election fraud on June 24th. Once again, in Turkey, who votes for whom will matter less than who counts the vote. And again, this was by Burak Bekdil, who was working for the Doğan Group, and they're the newspaper of record in Turkey, namely the Hürriyet Daily News, which is no longer what it used to be. It's now a shell of its former self. And Bekdil was one of the first to be fired for telling the truth. There are others, and I'll also look at some articles from one of those here pretty shortly. But I do have a couple things lined up, and I do intend to get them in the next couple days. So I'll be pumping out a couple of these pretty fast here. In the meanwhile, this has gotten long enough. Take care, and we'll see you.